Hey everyone, this is Scott from certmedia.com, and in this video, we're going to be talking about Jetpack. We're going to be going over everything there is in Jetpack. So sit down, have a cup of tea, and let's begin this journey. I'm actually an avid user of Jetpack. I like what Jetpack has to offer. I use it on my own websites and my hobby websites. It offers just a very useful amount of flexibility. It automatically will sync with my phone to use the WordPress.com mobile app or the WordPress.com app for Windows. Or I'll just go to WordPress.com if I need to write multiple blog posts on different sites. It's just really effective at that basic level of connectivity between all my devices and how I write. Outside of my phone, the only other device that I primarily will do writing on is a Galaxy Chromebook. It works without any issue, and working from the WordPress.com site, honestly, is just sometimes easier than going to the WordPress admin panel. But outside of that, the free version comes with a ton of functionality. And don't worry, I'll probably have to address whether you should pay to upgrade in another video because it's a whole different subset of what is worth it to you and the advantages. But for this free version, which is going to make up the most of you, let's jump into the settings and the modules and just go with it. So I basically set this up on default settings. I just installed it and I let it do whatever it needs to do. I haven't changed anything. I've pretty much left it all as default. So we are going to go to the settings panel because we're not going to really look at the dashboard to turn on anything. That's just too much work. So the security tab is where you start getting some of the information for Jetpack. Primarily get downtime monitoring. Free downtime monitoring is a useful bit of functionality. However, I will say that sometimes users just don't like getting notices when their site goes down. Sometimes intermittent downtime does happen, and sometimes certain web hosts will just block access to bots if it determines that it's malicious or that it's spammy. So sometimes a bot may register that your website's down even if it's not. But what's great is it will send you that email in the event of your site going down so that way you can quickly check it. And what's great is you can also configure the notification options by going to the WordPress.com site. And let's see if we can get it to load on up. And you could choose to send to your WordPress.com email address. And you modify in there where you want it to be sent to. And it works great. You can modify auto updates. My stance on auto updates is that you shouldn't do it. And the primary reason is I've seen a lot of auto updates break stuff, and I've seen a lot of hosts who enforce auto updates break stuff. It just happens. I had a site and it was running WooCommerce 3.9, so right before the big release. And they had auto updates enabled, and they were using Jetpack, and it updated WooCommerce 4.0, and it took the whole store down completely. Store was offline, sales couldn't be made, had PHP errors all over the place, and I had to roll back the WooCommerce version back to 3.9. And the problem with Jetpack's free version and the auto update functionality is you don't have a way, unless you took a automated backup through some means of restoring it. The backup functionality is locked behind the paywall. And if you're also somebody who doesn't have the time to debug an issue from an update, it's probably not a good thing to enable auto updates because things do break. So I try to stay away from auto updates. Even on my own sites, I make it a good practice to test updates for plugins that go through major releases. One bit of functionality I do recommend is the brute force protection. The brute force protection works without issue. It will stop hackers and brute force attacks from your website. It used to be called Brute Protect. It was its own service before Automatic acquired it. Works great. Is it a replacement for something like Cloudflare? No, not even close. The problem with it is because it is on your website, it still does take resources, and it's not a full-fledged security suite. It's not going to replace something like WordFence either, but it's still useful, and it does stop a lot of bots, and a lot of plugins are aware of when brute protect or the brute force protection is enabled in Jetpack, and they will work with it. The WordPress.com login, I actually don't ever use this. I prefer to have individual accounts for each of my sites, primarily because I tend to use pretty secure passwords in the first place, and you can get two-factor authentication through something like WordFence already. But the fact that you can use WordPress.com is a good option, especially if you're not good with managing passwords. The performance section has really only a handful of options. The lazy loading functionality in Jetpack by default is not that good. I would just simply not use it. Lazy loading in Jetpack is very rudimentary. It is super simple compared to something like A3 lazy load or lazy load optimized images by the WordPress Rocket team. I wouldn't use this. It's just not going to give you that level of performance, and it's going to miss a lot of images. But if you're just a site that has a really basic 2010 theme or 2020 theme, this will work for you. But for complex websites running other themes, I wouldn't use this option. The site accelerator feature is a bit of hit or miss. More or less for most sites, I tend to avoid it, particularly the static file load times. Do not ever check the speed up static file load times. You could check the image load times. That's probably a good fix for most websites. But static file load times run into all sorts of issues, primarily when it comes to concatenation and minification that you see in something like auto-optimize. Because what this does is it will take files that are like common libraries like jQuery migrates, but it won't take your theme files. So if you have a theme that you bought off Theme Forest or it was custom made, it won't take your style.css from your theme and serve it from the CDN. It only does major libraries. The problem with that is you end up hurting your performance overall, because a lot of times your theme and your other plugins tend to overlap a lot with code. So when you combine the assets using something like auto-optimize, you tend to yield better performance gains even if your site has HTTP2 or HTTP3 or whatever you're running. And because it serves it from a different URL, most caching plugins will not merge it. And that's kind of a security measure. WordPress Rocket does minify third-party JavaScript, but it does not do third-party CSS. You got to keep that in mind. But in all honesty, the performance that you get from the static file load time is much worse than Cloudflare. And I have a guide on how to set up Cloudflare. I'll put it in the eye. And it's just much faster. And I would prefer that you use that over the static file load time. Under the writing tools, you do get access to some kind of cool things, actually. You get access to their gallery, of course, the Carousel gallery that you can insert on the post. And you can choose whether it displays them in a full screen type gallery, the show a comments area in the carousel, and all that good stuff. If you're somebody who makes use of galleries, particularly somebody who is a photographer, or you're just trying to showcase your work, you can go ahead and give this a shot, and it may actually look pretty good. One thing to keep in mind is when you do use this, all the images are served from the WordPress.com CDN, so you need to keep that in mind. But it's effective. It works. I've never really had much issues with it. You could choose your color scheme, and it's good. It's solid what it does. I'll try and throw one together for you real quick. The carousel. If I search for Jetpack, I should see a gallery. Okay, there we go, tiled gallery. And you go to your media library and you pick all your images and create new gallery. You can insert a gallery. You can modify how it looks. You could choose to use a tiled column, circles, squares. You could see it all in real time thanks to the block editor. And you could do quite a few good things with the gallery and carousel functionality in the Jetpack plugin. I don't really have much of an issue with it. I do like that you could change add a filter to the images. It looks really nice. That's because of the WordPress.com CDN. But it's honestly just a lot of fun to play around with. You get a lot of great functionality out of it. The composing section it's mostly just feature items. If you know what Markdown is, it's commonly used on sites like forums and GitHub use Markdown. It's basically a form of markup where when you're writing, it'll convert certain attributes, like if you do in parentheses the URL and then give the URL and then wrap around a text, it'll convert it to a link. Some people do better with Markdown. Most of you probably don't know what Markdown is, and frankly, I just wouldn't see why you'd use it. The block editor is totally sufficient for me. You can enable this cool option here that will copy entire post pages, including tags and settings. Basically, this is just a duplicate post functionality. You enable it, and then you have the option to copy a post or a page, so you don't have to download a whole separate plugin anymore. And you can easily flip it off in the settings if you're not going to use it. And that's one thing I do recommend with Jetpack. Always, if you're not using the option, turn it off. Then you have latex markup for math. I'm not even going to try to explain this, mostly because I don't write anything with math. That's just how it is. I just don't have anything to really add to it. I wouldn't use this in most situations. You can choose to compose using shortcodes to embed media. For most sites, don't even bother. The OEmbed system is totally sufficient to handle that. I wouldn't really enable the option. There are 2 custom post types that Jetpack allows you to register for: portfolio and testimonials. And I'm going to address why this works. So first of all, it allows you to add the portfolios, and it does add a basic shortcode to display them. It's primarily implemented so that way when let's say you buy a theme and it has portfolios as a post type. If you're using Jetpack to register the portfolio, you get the advantage of retaining the post type content in the event of you switching themes. One of the cardinal sins that themes oftentimes do is register a post type within the theme. And when they do that, if somebody switches off their theme, they lose access to that custom post type. Personally, I don't have testimonials I do have portfolios on certmedia.com, but I have it registered through a companion plugin I'm using for Genesis. It's a little bit of a different use case, but this is a great way to register these different post types if you're going to keep Jetpack and you're going to actively use them through different multiple design periods and swapping to different themes. Under the theme enhancements, you can modify a couple of interesting things. So you can enable infinite scrolling. Infinite scrolling is basically you get to the end of your blog post and you can keep scrolling and it'll bring in another post. And in the case of this, it will do it on the blog page. So you set your post page, you get to the end of the 5 posts or whatever you're showing on there, and you can keep on scrolling. You could choose to do it with a button if you wish, or you could just choose to keep loading them as it scrolls down. By default, it is disabled because not all themes are compatible. You may want to go ahead and test your theme on a staging site before enabling it just to make sure that it doesn't cause any wonky errors. For most default themes, and it should work for Genesis 2, I believe, it should work out of the box without many issues. One option here is the Enhanced CSS Customization panel. I don't recommend using this ever. For one reason, it tends to make your CSS in the custom CSS section, which is under Appearance, Customize, Additional CSS. It makes it load in a file, and it makes it load in a file that is non-static. So it basically loads it as a dynamic PHP file for your custom CSS instead of it being inlined. You have 2 issues. Number 1, if you're using CSS for its cascading effect and you're trying to override it just by using an inline style, that goes out the window. But the more important one that I care about, because I always care about it, is the performance impact. Because it loads it in a dynamic fashion, you have a very slow loading CSS style sheet now, and it typically isn't merged by most plugins. Auto-Optimize will not combine the CSS style that this generates because it's not .css. It's technically a PHP file that has the contents of your CSS. You do get one advantage and it's the ability to have a history. So you make an edit, you save, and it's basically a revision for your custom CSS section. But I don't ever see a reason why you use that. I mean, if you're working on complicated and large styling changes, you should be doing it in your style sheets in a child theme. You should not be just using the additional CSS section. The additional CSS section is typically meant for either you have to add the CSS inline or it's a couple of changes that you're doing. If you're doing substantial changes, you definitely want to add it into your child theme CSS. You want to be properly commenting your code, and you just want to be practicing keeping good documentation of what you're changing. So I'm not really a fan of this feature personally, But there's probably somebody out there who wants to have that ability to go through a history of their changes, then you can do that. There are some extra widgets in here. So Twitter forms, Facebook page URLs, the little Facebook embed, subscription forms. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I'll enable it just so we can look through them all together. We go to appearance and widgets. Personally, I don't use any of these widgets, but a lot of people do like them, and for good reason. It saves you time, and it saves you the need to grab another plugin. So you get the contact info and map. This is also a block which you can add into pages. You can add contact info, and you can add the map information. So you come over to your sidebar. You include the link, the address. You could choose to show the map, but if you do, you have to get a Google Maps API key. And you add your email address, your phone number, and whatever else you really need, and your hours. The cookies and consent banner is another good option. What this does is to help you get GDPR compliant and the EU cookie law. The good news for us is in the United States, we don't really technically need to care about the cookie banner. I also tend to disagree with the cookie law. I think it's kind of silly in my own opinion, but I understand that it is important. And there is a nice option for you to easily add it. What you do is you add it just like you would. You include your banner text. You have to include links to your privacy policy. You need to choose the means of dismissal. You could choose to dismiss it after 30 seconds or however many seconds. After the user scrolls to the page, and you can choose how long the consent period lasts for. I will briefly show you how it works. So we went ahead and we added it in the sidebar here. So let's just add it to the footer real quick. And we added it, and it gives you this nice little banner, and you have to click close and accept. And once you do, it is saved. You can choose the styling, and it looks great. You could choose display WordPress post, which is basically just a combination of recent posts from another WordPress.com website or Jetpack site. You could use the Facebook page plugin to give you that nice little box, and there's just a lot of nice stuff in here that you can easily integrate through a standard widget. There are a good handful of widgets in here. I think it's around like 15 or so. It is quite expansive. Me, personally, I don't use them, but that's just me. The one cool thing though that you do get is the widget visibility controls. What this does is it actually allows you to control under what condition a widget can be rendered. So instead of creating a bunch of different sidebars for different content types, let's say you run a news site and you want to be able to customize which ads, maybe you're running an affiliate ad campaign, is showing under which category. Instead of creating different sidebars and registering it with a theme and trying to output them for the specific category, what you could do is use one category like the sidebar. And let's see if we can add something. We'll add this archives thing right here. And we just say, hi, or you, because I misspelled it. And you can go over to your contact page, and as you could, your home page, and it says, hi. But now you could set a condition that says you could choose to hide or show. So you could choose to hide if the page is, and then you could set the front page. And now the widget no longer shows. Keep in mind though that any layout changes that occur because of the present widget do not change. So as you can see, my text looks like this, and if I never had a widget, it may not look like this. It may be full text. So keep in mind that if the sidebar is technically registered, in certain themes, it will still act like there is something in the sidebar and choose to render it. I've seen it with some custom theme forest themes. So for instance, if this was completely full width in one line, in certain conditions, a theme may end up pushing it off to the left end just like this. Now, it depends on your theme and the implementation naturally, but for most sites, it's going to work without issue. And I actually do use this functionality on a couple of sites where I use affiliate ads, and it's not on certain medium, but I use affiliate ads and I target them on different niches, and I use Amazon affiliates as the means of running different ad campaigns for different users and different categories, and it's really useful. Post by email is probably the most useless feature that's in this entire plugin. I honestly can't think of a single time I've ever thought, wow, I wish I could email my website to make a post. And I definitely wouldn't want this to be done in the post-Gutenberg block editor world. It would just look absolutely terrible. I wouldn't recommend ever using this functionality, but if you have to, or you're using some kind of auto poster where you just email it to like 6 different sites and it publishes it out, auto blogs are still a thing in 2020, and I don't know why, but I think somebody's found a way to make money with it. But you can set up that functionality. Personally, I don't use it. I've never used it. I have never emailed a website to post to it, and I don't want to. The WordPress.com toolbar is another bit of useless functionality, in my opinion. So as you can see, you get this nice standard toolbar for whatever your site is, and it shows you your site-specific nonsense. And you enable the WordPress.com toolbar, though, and number one, it reloads your back end, and it looks just like WordPress.com. It's completely unoriginal. It looks like every WordPress.com website. So if you're using something like SiteKit, and you're trying to get analytics, or you're using WordPress Rocket, you want to clear your cache, it's gone. That functionality, out the window. I have no idea why this is an option. I've never used it. I'm not a fan of it, so I normally leave it disabled. The sharing section, so there are sharing buttons in here. I'm not a fan of their style. Personally, I just prefer NovaShare now. I live with the styling. I like how it's fast. These are slower than NovaShare, and there's less options for networks. But it's a nice feature to have if you're just looking for simple share buttons. You also get like buttons, which is kind of a silly feature. It is not a Facebook like button. This is something that a lot of people ask me for. No, this is not what you think it's for. It's actually to enable a WordPress.com specific feature. If anyone here actually reads the WP Tavern, they have, I believe they still have it, a like button on the bottom of their post. And it's basically just something for those who are logged into WordPress.com to like your post. For most websites, you'll never use it. To be quite frank, I don't use it, even though my content is for WordPress users. I just don't like the way it looks, and I think it's kind of silly. It's great that it likes it, but nobody really goes to WordPress.com actively and reads their news feeds from my experience. I don't do it. I've never met anyone that really does. Most of the time, everybody gets their news from Facebook and Twitter and emails. So I leave that option disabled. You do get the cool publicize feature, which allows you to easily post your posts to your social media accounts. There are not many options for here. You can do Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Tumblr, and you can connect for the Instagram widget, your Instagram account, the MailChimp account for the MailChimp widget, and connect Google Photos to access your Google Photos. But there used to be a lot more options in here. Primarily, you had access to Google Plus and Path. However, both of those no longer exist. I wish they added more. Primarily, I wish there was Pinterest or Mix.com or really anything. Part of the thing is that social media, when it's automated, it for the lack of a better word, just isn't good. When you just auto publish content to social media, your engagement rate just goes down because it's unoriginal. It basically, what it'll do is it'll take the title and it'll take an excerpt and it'll just leave in parentheses at the bottom of that excerpt X amount of words left, and this is for Facebook at least. And it's just not very good. You can write a custom output, but it's for all the social networks. So if you're writing a custom phrase or message to go out to social media, it applies to Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Tumblr all alike. However, Tumblr is a blogging platform primarily. Facebook has no character limit virtually. Twitter has 280 characters as your character limit. That's going to hurt you if you're trying to auto-publish to Twitter. And LinkedIn tends to have an entirely different audience from all three of those different social media networks, so you have to choose entirely different verbiage. I wish the tool was just a bit more. That's the only phrase I can think of. Just a bit more. If you're going to have auto-publishing, send it to social networks that don't technically matter. Mix.com, which is what used to be StumbleUpon. I don't use it, in all honesty. I used to back when I started blogging, and I just don't use it anymore. And we already covered that I don't like the sharing buttons because they're not very attractive, but I'll show you what they look like. Everything now is done through the WordPress.com interface, and I just don't like it. But you get your sharing buttons. You can edit the sharing buttons. You could choose whether to use official buttons. Don't ever use the official buttons. It's very slow for performance. You could use text icon only or icon and text. Personally, I like the icon only because it's impossible to mess that up. And then you get to reorder the buttons that you have, and then you can add new buttons. And you can add all of these buttons: Facebook, Twitter, a print button, LinkedIn, Reddit, Tumblr, Pinterest, Pockets, Telegram, WhatsApp, and Skype. The mobile-specific one, Telegram and WhatsApp, should only show on mobile devices, so you don't have to worry about getting those mobile device-specific sharing platforms all muddled up with your desktop users. Under discussion, you can enable the WordPress.com comments form. It's basically just a slightly improved version of the default WordPress comments. Let me restore this generic Hello World post to give you a showing of what it should look like. Really, though, I don't like it. I've never used it. I know for a fact that WP Tavern does use this. But as you can see, this is what it looks like. It's pretty ugly. Basic functionality, you can choose your color scheme to be light or dark or transparent. I didn't save the option. You could choose to enable comment likes, pop-up gravatars. Don't ever use the business cards for gravatars. Nobody updates their gravatar. It's gravatar only exists because WordPress exists. The website's hard to use. I had such a struggle updating my author profile image, and honestly, every time I go there, it's just a pain to use. Nobody uses gravatar that much, and the site really needs it. Gravatar itself needs an entire overhaul to what it's supposed to offer. So don't enable that option. Markdown for comments, certainly don't do that. There are bots who will take advantage of that, and they will spam you to no tomorrow. Comment likes is, again, a silly feature, but if you want that extra level of interactivity, you can enable it. And, dark mode. And, it exists. But again, I just like the standard WordPress comments. It's basic and it's neutral. It doesn't interrupt the design of your website. The subscriptions option is really rudimentary for what it is. So basically what happens is the option will enable a checkbox at the bottom of your comments. It can allow you to notify them of new posts and follow-up comments. The problem with it is you get super generic looking emails. They're in WordPress styling. They're not in your site's colors. It's basically slammed and marked with WordPress.com styling, but it does email them for free whenever a new post is published. And the better part of it is really getting notified of new comments. But it's been a feature for such a long time now, and it hasn't gotten any better. It doesn't fit your branding, and it's functional, and I do use it, but I just wish that we could style the emails. You can style emails in BuddyPress, and there's probably a technical limitation on the WordPress.com side of things that prevents you from doing it. But if that was something you could pay for, that would probably be more beneficial than the basic interface that you get now. And finally, we're running down to the wire on our free features. The related post functionality basically exists for sites that don't have access to related posts already. It's fine. It doesn't do a whole lot for most sites. Personally, I'm just a fan of themes who implement related posts by categories. It looks better, it fits the design better. But this is an option if you have no other option. I would sooner use this over YARP, yet another related post plugin, or really any other related post plugin, because fundamentally those plugins tend to be very expensive on the server to process, while this does all the processing on the WordPress.com side of things. Then you get the wp.me short links. If you want an easy way to get a short link to your WordPress post URL, you'd enable this. You can get a short link to your post. If you used to be able to in the classic editor to easily copy it. But obviously now, because we have the Gutenberg editor, it gets locked behind the Jetpack button, which that's fine. And you get this URL, it's wp.me. You can share it to Twitter and whatnot. It's basically Bitly, but for WordPress. You could generate a XML sitemap. This is actually a cool feature because it generates a new sitemap. However, the issue is it doesn't integrate really with most SEO plugins. So, and the premium version of Jetpack does come with SEO settings, but they're far behind that of something like Yoast SEO. So I wouldn't really recommend upgrading to get those SEO features. And finally, you get the ability to verify your site. Really, the only good thing about this option is you get access to Pinterest and Yandex, Google, and Bing. Some of the search engine optimization plugins don't include Pinterest, but this functionality does exist in Jetpack. Now that we've looked at all the settings, the one thing I do want to show you too is you're able to access the individual modules, which is basically the old interface. And this is where you could turn off features individually if you're having a hard time finding them. For instance, the JSON API is technically always included in WordPress core. I'm not really sure why it's enabled by default, but it is. And you could turn off everything in here. For instance, WooCommerce Analytics is enabled. And you can click the names of the items and it'll take you to the documentation. And as it says, additional usage tracking for WooCommerce and Jetpack. So basically it sends extra data for your WooCommerce products, such as when the products are your most viewed products, how many products are bought, and it uses that to help give you better data. It integrates with the Jetpack Stats plugin, which is just called Site Stats, and it works just fine. And you get access to the standard tiled galleries that we were playing with earlier. You can configure your subscription settings here, and it's very basic. It just takes you back to this option. Really, Jetpack Free is just honestly a great plugin. From a performance perspective, there is a hit. And the hit mostly comes against sites that are primarily not static content. If you're running a BuddyPress website or a BBPress website, that's when you're going to get the bulk of the impact. For static blogs and websites like my own on certmedia.com, where most of my content is static, I don't have a red login form, I don't do any registration, the overall performance impact is pretty minimal. It doesn't add any Ajax requests, and I've actually stripped out a lot of requests, and I've even removed the main Jetpack CSS file from loading on certmedia.com. And what I did is I stripped the CSS that I needed and I cut out the rest. Now that took a lot of time and it took more than it was probably worth, but I was trying to do it just to see if I could. Overall though, for the vast majority of websites, Jetpack is a fine addition. It shouldn't cause you any major slowdowns as so long as you're on a fairly decent web host, and the functionality that's in it is honestly great. Their team is amazing. They keep the plugin well updated. It's secure. And I guess the one thing that they need to change is the stigma that adding Jetpack basically hammers your site to the point of non-existence. I haven't had that issue, mostly because the site is primarily static. In implementations where you're not caching all your pages and you're not using a CDN and you're on a slow host, that could be a problem. But the value that Jetpack Free at least brings to my website makes it more than worth it to me. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask in the comments below. Otherwise, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.